Wow.
If it's a little bit, it's like third.
Hi.
Second, third maybe, right?
We're missing Mrs. Rivas. Let me check in with her quick. Can everyone do a quick microphone check meanwhile we wait for Mrs. Rivas?
1, 2, 3.
Testing, testing.
Hello? Yeah.
1, 2.
Do we sing? Testing?
Hello.
That was
Why,
very
hello
low,
there.
Mr. Herrera. Christina, let me see. Check. Okay, that's good. The idea is that you set up the microphone now so you're not like straining your neck throughout the evening by pushing it forward. So make sure that it's at a comfortable spot. Okay. Oh, that's. She is on her way right now.
Should we wait or?
We can. Nope, she just said, late, be there very soon.
Maybe 5 minutes. I was running late too right now.
Yeah.
So that's the course offering.
Out of this world.
Yeah, and like 50% of them are.
Of course.
And so you think about that, how do you?
How do our kids compete? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Beth, do you mind doing a quick mic check to make sure that, and maybe, yeah, bring it
Testing?
closer? Perfect. The idea is that you bring it close enough so you're not straining your neck to, there you go. Oops.
calling the El Monte City School District's Board of Education study session at 5:05 p.m. Quickly, with roll call in this particular order. Ms. Mendez,
Present?
Mrs. Rivas,
Present.
Mr. Segrist,
Present.
and Mrs. Cobian,
Present.
and Rueda's present. And now, let's stand for the flag salute. Please put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now we'll move on to communications, beginning with public comments.
I do not see anybody here for public comment.
Okay? No public comments? Written communications?
No written communication has come forward.
No written communications, okay? And we'll begin now with board member communications, beginning with Mrs. Cobian.
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Perfect, thank you, Mrs. Cobian. Ms. Mendez?
None at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Mendez. Mrs. Rivas?
Nothing right now.
Thank you. And Mr. Segrist?
Yes. Okay, I'm trying to speak through the mask, so maybe you can hear me. I attended the Loxton meeting online, and they did something that I think all of us could have learned from. They did Lozano Smith did a presentation on the Brown Act. It's been archived, so I can send the link to our superintendent to share with you. It was really well done. There was a question and answer period during the presentation. It was really an updated thing. One thing like right now that I remember, he said that when you have a meeting like this, a special meeting, you do not have to have public comments. You're not required to do that anymore. There's been some major changes on the Brown Act. Durfee School, I was there a couple of times, and guess what? No double parking. Yes. So the kids are safe. There's a lot of information in our community from the Vietnamese people who want to have dual immersion in Vietnamese. Many of them are willing to move their kids from another district to us. I think we could look into that. Boys State, I do again, and we have about 10 boys going to be going, and many of them are alumni from our district, and we've always had great feedback about the kind of students that we send up to Boys State. And yes, 2 people still want to come see the equipment, to local business people, so I'll talk to the superintendent about that. Other than that, thank you all for being here. I've been tested the 7th time now, and I'm still negative, thank God. Okay, thank you.
Good to hear, good to hear. Thank you, Mr. Segrist. And as for me, none at this time. Perfect, so now we'll move on to study session. And before I pass it over to Dr. Garcia, I really want to thank Mrs. Rivas and Dr. Garcia. So we've been together on multiple conversations on equity, and I know this is something that really touches us, that we really want to be engaged. We have been part of, and today the main purpose is really to come together. We want to make sure that we hear from each and every one of you as we continue the conversation in terms of equity. And as I mentioned, we continue with this process. Please know that your input is really important, and I know that it will provide those best recommendations and next steps as we move forward. As we move forward with our statement, our equity statement, our equity policy. So thank you so much, and with this, I'll pass it over to Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, President Redas. And actually, it's a perfect introduction or segue to the introduction to our facilitator, someone you all know very well, Ms. Cristina Davila. She happens to be the executive administrator at the Jeff Seymour Family Center. But since day one, I think since we first met her, we knew that she wore many, many hats. And among the hats that she wears, she also has many talents, and facilitation is one of those talents. And the list is pretty long, I should say. Christina is very passionate about equitable work and equity. As you can see, the work that we've been doing at the Jeff Seymour Family Center has been very impressive, and it's been driven about what are the needs in the community, and how do we meet those needs, knowing that they look very different from day to day. So it is my pleasure to turn this study session over to Christina Davila, who will be facilitating the conversation this evening. Just as a quick reminder, study sessions are less formal than board meetings, so there is an opportunity for dialogue between board members. I think because of the masks, it is important that, we're looking at each other, we're listening, but at the same time, feel free to do a little bit of what we call popcorn, not popcorn reading, but, pop in as we do with popcorn. So the idea is that when somebody finishes speaking, if you have a thought that you'd like to share, that you would just continue. And so at this, I'll turn it over to Christina, and she will begin the facilitation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all. And so we're just going to jump right in. We're going to start with the 4 agreements. I think this is something that you all have seen in the past. And so we just wanted to reiterate some, ground rules, some agreements that we can all agree to have the conversation. So does anyone want to read them?
Sure, I can go. 4 agreements. Number 1, stay engaged. 2, experience discomfort. Number 3, speak your truth. And 4, accept non-closure.
Thank you. And I think these are going to stand true as we have the conversation. I want to put an emphasis on the 4th one, right, which is like accept non-closure. I think we're not going to solve the world's problems today, but we'll definitely start the conversation. All right. So the opening discussion, I know you all received the questions and the statements beforehand, so I just wanted to give an opportunity for everyone here, we can do a roundabout, to talk through what you think about or what comes to mind when you think about these 2 statements. So the first one is every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. So let that sink in for a little bit. And then the second statement, every student deserves a premium education that only some currently experience. 2 very powerful statements.
I would make a comment about the second one, by the way. It says every student deserves. It also means that every student must give their all themselves and involve themselves and not expect to be given anything, because if they don't participate, like Jaime Escalante told me, if the student does not participate, you can't blame the system. The student has to partake also and be involved in it, because they're masters of their own fate too. So it's one of the things I'll never forget that he told me. So thank you.
And I think that's a good point. And on top of that, kind of when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, what do we categorize as our system? Is it our schools? Is it the district? Is it the larger community? Because all of those kind of tap into how successful students can be. And so I think even though, our budget really can only be used in very restrictive ways, and that's how we kind of enact change within our system. I think, always acknowledging that there are these other factors outside of our control, and then the ways that we can try to move the needle with those as well.
And just to piggyback on what Mrs. Colbion just said, really to recognize, right, that there are different factors, right, to identify, and how do we move from that, right? I think that's also a very important question.
Thanks. So I wrote a lot of notes, so you're going to have to forgive me. It's going to read like a speech. So I've been thinking a bit about that work hard ethic, right, that we promote in our schools, right? It's very typical for school systems to tell students, if you want to be successful, then you have to work hard and you have to compete and you can never give up, right? And we say it like, go after your dreams and be proactive and have grit, right? These are things from our own, our own practices that we share with students. And of course, those are really important values. They're realistic, they're helpful, but they don't give a complete picture, really, of what's determining the success of students. So we've mentioned, Mr. Segrist mentioned, right, that there's this work part, but there's this system part. And the system part is really what we're wanting to focus in on, I think, today and whenever we talk about equity. And I wrote just a couple of examples. I'm sure we can all think of many, many examples of the system at play. But for example, maybe a student's success in class is dependent on the amount of time that they have available to do homework after school, right? Or maybe it's dependent on whether or not their mom knows math and chemistry and physics and computer science and can help their kid with homework. Or on who the student's friends are and whether or not they're able to get the answers from last year's tests, right? And I'm just being real. And the examples that I share aren't necessarily all from our district, right? They're from, just whatever experiences I have in life, whether it's our district, the high school district, the place where I taught, speaking with educators in other districts or even in other states. Right, so I don't mean to be throwing anybody in particular under the bus when I share some examples. But our systems do determine our students' paths, and they determine, in part, right, in conjunction with that work ethic, right, but they determine who gets to be successful and who doesn't get to be successful. So something that Nicole Anderson has shared with us, every child is brilliant. So in equity work, we ask, how do we affirm and develop the brilliance of each kid?
Madam
But then we
President, may I
also ask, what do we do that minimizes the student's brilliance? So are we measuring the wrong things? Are we measuring not enough things? Are we using tests and grades as an effective measure of learning? Are we using tests and grades to sort and arrange students? Those would be some of the questions that we'd be asking.
I was going to ask, should we raise our hand when we're going to speak that way? We can be recognized.
Well, what do you
I'm sorry I
suggest?
interrupted you.
Maybe raising hand?
You can definitely do that, and I'll be taking speaker's notes. Right now, you all had a good flow, but if you want to say a comment, I'll take a speaker's list, and then we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, I was going to address the second issue again. I'll give you some history about summer school. Before any of you were born, when I was going to summer school, everybody got to go. There was you had to be tested, you had to be at a certain level. Everybody went. And this is what bothers me. I think every child should go to summer school if they want to go. It should not be leaving anyone out, because I think all of us as teachers know that when you pick up the kids at the coming to the new school year, those kids that did not go to summer school are behind. There is a learning loss that takes place. They're always behind because and also it impacts the families. The families are much better off if their kids are in summer school. It allows for them to plan better their lives and so on. So I encourage all of us to consider putting everybody in summer school. I believe the high school does that, our high school district. You don't have to have any certain grade point average or anything to go to summer school. And I've heard the argument, well, they prepare them for college. Let's prepare our kids for high school. That's my take on that. And I'm sorry if I'm dominating, but it's something that bothers me because when I went to summer school, I went and I had fun, but I learned a lot also. And I wasn't behind when the school year started, the new school year. Thank you.
Actually, in the last few years, we have been able to offer summer school programming to any student that wants summer school. Of course, it is dependent on funding, right? And we know that there's an ebb and flow to our funding that impacts our ability to offer summer programs. But ideally, our goal is to continue to offer summer school programming to all students, and then even programming outside of the academics, so that their experiences and just a variety of offerings. And we can talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you. Okay.
So I just wanted to bring the conversation back a little and reiterate some of the points that you all have brought up together. There's been an emphasis on systems change, right? And really taking the time to define what the system is for ourselves as a district. I heard that, success requires a partnership between not only the school district, but the parents and the students. Everyone plays a key role in ensuring a student's success, including the students present themselves, right? And then I also heard exploring different factors of affecting success. So there are things that are within our sphere of control within the district, the policies, the environment that we provide, but things outside of our control, or perhaps in other institutions that also serve the community, right? Whether it's the city or our homes or neighborhoods, right? Before we move on, I wanted to check in to see if you finished your thought, and then
Thank you. Yeah, I can add a little more because I actually do have a few comments on that idea of the premium education, right? And then I'm sure Alyssa probably is ready to share as well.
Finish yours.
Thank you, yeah. So with the premium education, just a couple notes based on the reading and all of that. I've really started to consider who in our schools do we promote as successful, right? I think, just as a society, we sort of function, we kind of choose leaders, but we choose leaders based on our values, right? And what we think is like a really great, person to have in charge, right? But I think we probably do the same thing with students, that we just have some unspoken ideas and rules about the kinds of students that we think are being successful right now and the ones that are not. And so who do we promote as successful? And then what extra opportunities do they receive that other students might not? So for example, there's been some talk about electives. What stands in the way of students participating in specific electives or other enrichment opportunities? What rules, explicit or unspoken, have we put into place that keep students from participating in these things and discovering, developing their brilliance? But then if you flip that around, if you just look at the students and what they're choosing to enroll in, how do we perceive students differently based on those choices, right? So for example, do we perceive Avid as a better choice than woodshop? Or do we perceive student government as a better choice than sports? I'm just naming, just for example. So are we affirming students differently based on the choices that they're making and what they would like to pursue? So for me, those ideas are wrapped up in that idea of premium education. We're not just preparing students for tests, right? So when it comes to premium education, we're giving them many, many experiences, right, that open them up to the possibilities of life. I'm done.
That's great.
Ms. Mendez and then Mr. Segrist.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so two things. I'm gonna go with address the first one. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. I'm gonna give an example that kind of showed up today within my job, and I kind of wrote down my notes here. So it's regarding electives, and so it kind of perfectly aligns what you were saying, and it aligns with, that mindset of doing an equity walk. The book mentions like something that you can do is do an equity walk, and you can kind of run. And obviously, when you do an equity, I think that one of the chapters said, like, look for trouble, right? Like a lot of times you're going to be shown all like, oh, and this is the great, this is the great things that we're doing, but purposely look for, and not like you're looking for trouble, but that's how you find those inequities. So I'm going to give this example of 3 secondary schools that it just so happened between today and last week I visited, and I was comparing the opportunities that students in special education have with electives. So we have school A, and so their schedule is a traditional six periods. So that gives them their 4 core classes, a PE, and 1 elective choice. And school A for specialized academic instruction offers push-in. Then they offer the elective of specialized academic instruction, and then they have the special day classes in those core classes. So then students can, if need be, can kind of blend or push into those classes as needed. So with that model, pretty much most students who are in special education do not have an elective opportunity. They also have a high EL population. So even if you don't need that elective, then you're put into an ELD elective. And this came up from a teacher texting me from elementary school. Hey, Lizette, I'm doing this for my student, but if they're EL, it says I have to pick an elective option for them, but they're EL and it doesn't come up as an option. I'm like, oh, well, actually, they're not going to be given a choice of an elective, right? So then school B is the traditional 6-period model. So they have one elective choice. So they have for specialized academic instruction, the push-in model. They don't offer an elective, but they have the special day class options. So then students get an elective, but then they miss out, if need be, on that specialized academic instruction elective. It's pretty much the pull-out that some students really do benefit from. So they get the elective, but then they're missing out on that daily pull-out instruction. And then the last school, and it was today that I visited, they have a block schedule. So they have 8 classes. And it's the performing arts like magnet school, right? So then they get 2 electives. So with their special ed model, they have push-in and an elective class, but they don't have the special day class. So then kids miss out if they need to. If they need like a smaller class setting for math, they don't have that option. But at least they get the specialized academic instruction elective, and then they get a second elective, but then they miss out if they need to have. So again, do you see how again it was an aha moment of every system is perfectly designed to get the results, and it gets it because they leave. You're allowing every middle school to design the program that best fits their model and their school schedule. But again, what is the best option, right? What are the results of the students? Is it better for them to have an elective, to not to have an elective? So that example, I just kind of want to provide it like a real life example of how a system's in place that's unintentional. But when you take a step back and, the different middle schools aren't really necessarily communicating. So I asked, well, how would you think of this model? Like, oh, I didn't realize that we could do that model, right? So I kind of wanted to share that real life story. And it really ties into the equity work that we're doing, that it's a mindset and it's a systems approach. Like, what's our system as a district? And then what are the individual systems going on at the school sites? Because you can't assume that the way one school grades, right, is the same way another school grades. Or the way one school kind of has their special education services is the same as the other school. You can't assume that. And it really took me going out there to visit to really see it for myself. And then for the second statement, every student deserves a premium education that only some currently experience. I follow up with, what does it mean to have a premium education? How do we define that? And what comes up is I'm having more and more, people will come to me and ask me, oh, what do you think about this district or that district? I heard this district's better or this school is better. And I ask, well, how do you define good? Are you basing it off of word of mouth? Are you basing it off of test scores? Because actually I can tell you that the teachers at this school have more heart and have more intervention than maybe another school. So I really push when people ask me that, like, how do you define a good school? And it ties into, how do you define premium education? Is it just test scores, or is it the environment that you're looking for? How do you define that? And then for us as well, how do we define premium education?
Yeah, those are all really great points. In the book on page 123, there was a section about everybody knows. There were all these sort of things that we all assume about education that, and ways of doing it. And I think that kind of speaks to what you were saying about, having remedial classes and things like that for students that are behind it. That's the way we solve the problem for them. And it's been something, I've thought about, in terms of our middle school model, because we are limited as a K-8 district with the kinds of electives and the number of electives just because of the student population. And students may miss out even on those opportunities because they need to take a secondary math class or a secondary ELD class or something like that. And so, kind of thinking about that part of it. And then, and thinking about premium education and what we, maybe we consider within our district, who are the students we might consider get premium education. And then even looking beyond that at what in the larger community. This weekend I had the opportunity to be at a very fancy private school to see their campus, to see what kind of things that they had to offer. And, people are paying $50,000 a year to go for 6th grade. But the things that students had the opportunity to do, and I think for me, that's kind of maybe how I define premium, is the more opportunities students have, the better they're going to do, regardless of where they started or what they're coming from, I think.
So I want to honor, I know Mr. Seegers had his hand up, and then I'm going to wrap up this portion. I think the intention of discussing these two topics in particular was to get an idea of what equity meant for every one of you, right? And so a lot of themes emerged already. We're talking about qualifiers for summer school and electives and, what opportunities our students have access to. So Mr. Segrest, I know you had a comment. I want to make sure that you have some time.
I hope I'm not going to take too much time, but a number of areas I'm really concerned about. First of all is history. Our students are spending $1 bills, some $2 bills, some 5-cent pieces. Do they even know who those people were that are on the dollar bill? George Washington, Thomas Jefferson on the nickel? Do they know what sacrifice those people did to give us the country that we have? If they don't, then that's not premium education. If they're not aware that George Washington spent 5 years in uniform challenging the greatest military power on earth and was able to beat them. He served for 8 years as president. Do those kids know that? He even refused to go on and be reelected because he said he didn't want to set up a dictatorship. So history is one area I'm really concerned about. Another is language. Yes, we have immersion for lower grades. What about the upper grades? Blair Middle School has immersion for middle school kids. When I was in school in Chino, the 14 schools I went to, 7th and 8th graders were required to take Spanish. Why don't we do that? I think our kids are being left out of education in terms of language. I think we really should look into offering Chinese, Vietnamese, Spanish for children in our schools. I know other districts do that. Chino still does it for over 50 years. I think a premium education includes a complete education, not just bits and pieces. And I think especially our children who have another language can develop even further, so by the time they get to high school, they're really well versed in their language. Thank you.
And I'll just what you were saying about history and stuff, I think it also, for me, maybe in a slightly different way, but looking at history and science tend to be the curriculums that, maybe we get to them once a week in the lower grades. I know in the middle school it's a separate period, but, if we need to focus more on math, more on reading, something comes up, those tend to be the subjects that aren't covered as fully. I'm not sure, having kids go through school, I'm not sure they've ever gone much more than halfway through a textbook, which is supposed to be our full curriculum. And not saying that teachers aren't trying and all of that, but I think our expectations of teachers and what they are expected to cover in the classroom, maybe we need to kind of reframe it, because I think history and science are equally important. I mean, kids have to know how to read, but in some senses, that's why you learn to read, so that you can read poetry, so that you can read about history, so you can understand it. So anyway, that's what that kind of led me to. Thank you.
All right. So thank you again for continuing the discussion. And I think the next piece, we're just going to go really quickly. I don't want to bombard you all with data, but I do want to kind of provide a brief description of our community, perhaps how it's remained the same and how it's changed. We have a unique opportunity to dive into 2020 census data that was collected right when the pandemic hit, right? So we can talk through some of those changes. So for the city of El Monte, I pulled this directly from the data from the census from 2020. And I pulled the top 3 races that were identified in the census. The percentage of people who are foreign born between 2015 and 2019. The percentage of households that speak a language other than English, which is really high, 84%, right? And then some technology, because I know that's something that our district has been focusing on, right? So this was, again, the data set was taken in 2020, right in the middle of us handing out devices and hotspots to our community. But, and just understanding that I was looking at a grant briefly in 2019, and our percentage of internet in the households was about 50%. So that went up significantly just in those couple of years. And then also looking at the high school diploma or higher rates versus the college degree or bachelor degree or higher, right? There have been some improvements, right? I remember when the Promise Foundation started, it was 11% bachelor's degree or higher. So now we're at 12.2. So just thinking about those things, right? We've made gains. There are a lot of efforts and initiatives in the community within our district and outside of our district. A lot of partnerships that have been formed. But there's still some work to do, right? We can go on to look at the data for Almani City School District. I pulled out the top 5 races that were identified for our student population, as well as the numbers and the percentages of our subgroups. I think sometimes we see the percentages, but it's good to see the numbers too, right? We're talking about equity and making sure that every student is included. Any thoughts or feedback on that? Any surprises on the data?
The language one at home surprised me.
The what?
How
Yeah.
high that was, yeah, within the city. Is that, do you know if it's defined as that's the primary language, or it's just there is a language?
The primary language spoken at home, yes. Okay, so I'm going to provide one more piece of data for you. This slide here is a description of what we are calling the Neighborhood Risk Index. And essentially, these are factors that are not prescriptive. They don't decide how our students are going to do, but we know that they are some of the external factors that we were talking about in the previous conversation, right? So single parent households, limited English proficiency in the home, population without a high school diploma, families with children in poverty. So these are factors, as well as, the positive factors, right? So families with a college degree, depending on the income that families are seeing. And so partners at UCLA did a really neat job of taking all of this census data and creating a heat map for us, which is here, and you all have a clear copy right behind. Yes, there you go. It's in your PowerPoint, but it's also a loose paper that printed a little better quality. And essentially, they mapped out where these factors existed in the community. The darker the area, the more of these risk factors exist in the community. The lighter the area, the less. So kind of like a neat visual representation, right, of some of the conditions that exist in our community. And again, I don't want to focus too much on the data, but I did want to provide some context. So when we're having these conversations, when we're talking about how we define success, we take these things into consideration. Okay? Any questions?
Ms. Davila, yes, as we go back to your slide on neighborhood risk index, and we see in detail just these particular factors, I think that when we're talking about identifying these factors, right, not just that, but working on how can we overcome these barriers with two specific questions that come to mind, continuing monitoring and reporting. So I think that's definitely important.
I'm sorry, did you say monitoring and reporting?
Yes, and reporting, yes. Very important when we're doing this.
And I think that's a really good question that I think one of the questions in the discussion is going to help address some of that. Ms. Mendez?
Yeah, this data makes me think that coming from an equity mindset, it's that it's looking at your data, right? And then developing, okay, what the systems are in place, right? And then how we're going to support that. So knowing that those are all those negative risk factors, it's like, okay, then as a system, how are we then supporting those risk factors, knowing that they're there? And that's that systems approach that we need to be taking.
Yeah, thank you, Lizette. I'm remembering something that Nicole Anderson said, and I feel like it was echoed in the book as well, that to be looking at, all the factors, but also being really careful to not jump to conclusions or make assumptions based off of those factors, right? So we read an example in the book where there was a problem, and then the teachers, everybody had different theories on what was causing the problem, and there was sort of a, perhaps based on some of these factors, right? And then when they talked to the students, they found out it was just something completely different that nobody had guessed was actually the driving force. So being really aware of the factors and allowing that to be a little flashlight for us, but then, not jumping to conclusions or making assumptions based off of those as well.
Definitely agree with that. Later on, we can have a conversation about how EDI data helped us identify bright spots, right? So the communities that were a little more resilient than what was expected, right? And we can talk about what were the conditions that our district helped set to see that success. So shameless plug there. All right. So we're going to move on with the study questions. And I put them in a specific order to talk through, how you all, we talked a lot about success, right? And so I think there's a need to help us come to the same page as to understand like what we define success as for El Monte City School District. I think everyone has an idea, but it's good to articulate it. So let's start with that question. How do we define success in El Monte City School District?
I hate to jump in, but I would say, in my opinion, success is knowing that we've given everything we can to every child and everything they need so they can succeed, leaving nobody out for any reason. Even, let's say, attendance. Maybe their attendance is low. Well, we have to kind of fix that. To always keep going and never giving up on the kids, because I've heard this before. Well, what can you expect from the kids from El Monte? The best. That's all we can expect, and give them the best we can. For me, that's success, and then knowing that they're achieving at the highest level possible, giving them resources above and beyond what we have, not just the standard curriculum, but extra resources. Here's an example. I have met no one in this community except a few people around where I live that know that if you're a Mexican citizen, you can get a bachelor's degree for free from La UNAM, the University of Mexico. That's one thing. Kids need to know about the resources they have, like aprende.org, adding those things in there and not saying, well, we can't provide them this stuff because it's not part of what we think they should learn. Children are going to learn whatever they want to learn, and I think the motivation. Library resources. How many people in this community know that you can get tutoring online from the library for free? The point being, that's part of knowing that we're successful when we share all the resources that are there. Because as the superintendent knows, resources are everywhere. It's just finding them and getting them out there. Because we can't say, well, this person didn't know it. Well, why? We need to tell them. On our website, for example, success is knowing those children are well fed. They're getting great, like we've been doing great work as far as providing resources. How many people know that you can go to any of our public parks from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock and get big boxes of free food? That's part of making our kids succeed, letting the families know that. So if our website includes not only free food, how about jobs? There are jobs everywhere. They're looking for people. Well, if we can help our children succeed, if their families succeed, it's a whole unit that we're after. And I'll stop talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seagrass. I know Ms. Cobian had.
Yeah, no, I think just for me, I give this a lot of thought, I even think about it for my own kids, what does success look like for them? But I think for me, just to be really specific, I think I would want our students to get to the point of graduating from high school with the preparation, with the desire, with the experience to then, to become adults and to have their options open to them, whether that's college or a trade or whatever it is they want to do. That they understand our country and our system enough to be good citizens, to vote, to be engaged, to understand how those systems work, to value diversity, and to cultivate creativity, problem solving, those kind of intangible skills. But I think it kind of goes back to the first thing, which is just that the world will change before they get, from first grade to 12th grade. And so being flexible and having kind of those, skills that will help them no matter what the world looks like when they're there.
Ms. Mendez?
Going off on that, that every child leaves here knowing what their strengths and their interests are. Because I'm going to say that's what then also then drives them and gives them that motivation, right? To then when they get to high school to know what the end goal is, right? But them leaving here knowing I have a strength in performing arts, and I have an interest or in science, and then that will then push them to that next level. So.
Yes, so as for me, and we were just talking about that premium education and really how that we define it very, very differently, right? But for me is to ensure that we're creating those opportunities for excellence in education, but at the same time to understand those unique challenges that students may face and providing them with those additional resources and support that they may need.
I love that none of us have mentioned test scores. That's telling. I had noted like the 21st century skills because I was trying to go after something similar to what you were saying, right? That just these skills that are important for life, right? And certainly the academics, partially measured by test scores, right? Not completely measured by test scores, but the academics are important for, when I say academics, I mean like specific, skills in different subject areas, right? That's important for opening up opportunities in college and beyond. But I really appreciate what you all have said about these skills and knowing what you're interested in, knowing what you're good at, and feeling like you've really been supported and affirmed in that throughout your school career. Exposure to lots of fields and different kinds of learning, that would be success for me. If we're talking about specifically our district preparedness for high school, where there they can map out their future goals and their plans.
And I'll piggyback on just a different part that I had as well, which is, I think, in addition to what we want for our students, I think also for the staff, the people who work for the district, I think success also needs to include, which I think overall we do a really good job, that feeling of community that everyone is kind of pulling together in the same direction with the same goals and feeling supported as adults who are guiding the kids. So I think that needs to be a part of that definition of success as well.
I like that, Mrs. Kobian, and really to piggyback on what you just mentioned, right? And what really comes to mind right now is how do we do this, right? and how can this look like? But definitely, the support, the resources, the education, the awareness to our staff, right? To successfully accomplish what our goals are.
So I heard themes, right? I heard academics, even though it wasn't mentioned until later, right? But definitely, I think there was like a general understanding, right? And measuring that beyond test scores, but really understanding concepts, right, within the different subject matter. I heard a lot of what I'm gonna bucket into social emotional well-being, which is like knowing oneself, our strengths, students' individual strengths and challenges. And also the interests, right? So they know how to pursue their educational career in the future. There was some talk about values, right? Valuing diversity, creativity, and then resources, understanding that we can, we want to provide as much as we can for our students, but also knowing what resources are available, right? So not just having the resources, because there are, like, folks mentioned, there are plenty of resources out there. But how do we make sure that people know what opportunities are available to them? So there's a big emphasis on that. Those are our themes. So I think for the district overall, is it worth spending some time talking through how we're doing some of those things? Or, perhaps it's an opportunity to share some of those. And then we can talk about, lead into what equity looks like for the district.
Yeah, if I can just interject, I know it's something that, one thing that I'm trying to keep tabs of is information that would be helpful for the board. Knowing that we do have a limited time right now, I'm calling it a parking lot, right? Because I think there is an opportunity for us to share some of the work that we're doing in some of these areas and give the board an opportunity to participate in those conversations, discussions. So please know that if you feel like you need more information on certain things, that's something that we can bring back to the board.
Thank you.
Okay. We're good? Okay, so let's move on. Do we want to move on?
We can pause there and open it up, like if there's any specific information that they would like on.
I think I would be interested, and I don't know if it's how you quantify it, but the ways that that we're measuring student success that's not the test scores or not grades, really. And
So as I heard all of
Yeah.
you talking, I was thinking about our mission statement and our vision statement, which are very powerful statements that I think, capture some of these thoughts. But to your point, I don't think there's anything that we are doing. We're measuring academics, we're measuring, very specific social emotional learning. But I don't think that, when I think back, like, how are we doing as a district, right? In meeting our mission and our vision. I don't know that I've ever framed the conversation in that way, which is kind of exciting to think about, okay, if this is something that we're aspiring to do, how close are we getting to it every year? Because we can speak to the different components. I'm thinking about some of the work that we've done with the scorecard, right? Something along those lines. I don't know if Mr. Salenbach, Mr. Herrera, you want to add to that?
No, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of aspects in there, and I think it's easy to gauge grades or test scores because there's a way to do that, whether it's an average or whether it's a completion or so on. But the other aspects of how do we gauge, what success might look like. I think we have to define our rubric per se, right, as a board or as a district entity, as to if we're going to look at a different area, what's the rubric to gauge success in, right? Because everyone is going to view this through different lenses, depending on their own past experience as well. So that might be, something that we, as a board and as a cabinet that we take on as well.
And even some of the assessments that we've engaged in recently, right? So some of the, I think it's the BASC assessment.
The BASC.
Or the MTSS team is doing. Looking at, beyond the test score, but how do students feel, right, when they're coming to school, right? Getting that perspective is something I think I think this district does a good job of looking beyond the, we got the presentation at the last board meeting on student data, right? So we really look at the data, but we look beyond the testing data and look at other metric points as needed.
One thought that I had in reading the book and thinking about these statements and questions, we really take an individualized approach to students, right? We have these data boards and every student is monitored, but from my understanding, it really is based on these numbers that we're saying don't really tell a complete story of the student, right? So I wondered if maybe we add to that student's card what we find to be their strengths, or what, together with the student, they're discovering to be their strengths, their interests, their brilliance, whatever that may be. Maybe that starts to just paint a bigger picture of the student and their progress through school. Just a thought.
Another thing, I'm wondering if with the EDI, and I know there's the middle grade, like if there's something within those kind of categories that we can identify, because they're a pretty complete, whole child kind of picture. Maybe there's something in that kind of can guide us in how we look at all the different pieces. So anyway, that's another thought.
Ms. Mendes?
Yeah, what came to mind was when we were able to go to open houses in person, their binders, their portfolio binders. That it was the Leader in Me binders, right? And it was and that's what we're looking for, right? When we're thinking about strengths, and they charted their goals, and I think they had a page like what my strengths are, and knowing that everything's all like online and digital, kind of thinking about that, like that would be great if something like when they left, it followed them like every year, like where now the binder is more like through a Google folder, and then the students are putting into their Google folder through the years, like their data sheets, their strengths, and then they graduate, right? Then have a portfolio of their strengths and all the things that they had done throughout the years.
That's a really good point. Through the Leader in Me, the students are asked to keep a binder that just really helps them track their success. They define success. There's a focus on the academics. There's a focus on, getting to know themselves and, making some of those leadership decisions for themselves, right? They're the leaders of their life. But I think I kind of go back to some of the comments that you made early on. There's this assumption, right, that we're all starting at the same place. It reminds me of something that I heard Ruby Payne once say, that this country really values individuals that have been able to pull themselves up from their bootstraps. But what happens to those that don't have boots to begin with, right? And so we do want to highlight, and of course, there's, so many people have overcome so many obstacles, but those that haven't, it's not because of their lack of willingness. We have to look at those conditions. And so going back to, I think the Leader in Me, there's great work there. That's something that I can definitely bring back to the board and share. Look, this is some of the work that we're doing. But going back to how do we define success, or how are we measuring our success? I think the state of California measures our success through the dashboard, right, which is primarily academics. It's chronic absenteeism, suspensions, those types of things. But I think we can create our own dashboard, so to speak, right, that kind of really measures what we think is important. I don't know what that looks like, so I'm just throwing it out there, and I know it's an opportunity for us to really just think that through. Not another dashboard, but something similar, right?
No, I definitely agree. And I think that it merits a conversation to take out the themes from what you all mentioned, how you define success, and thinking through the data sets that already exist. Because if Almani City School District does anything, is we have a lot of data on our students, right? And so, and the community at large. And I think it is an opportunity. I think it's overwhelming when you see all the data sets. But if we pick out the themes that you all really want to focus on, then those are the things that we can monitor for years to come. That's definitely a task. And then I just want to challenge you all to think a little bit about, because part of the book was not only quantitative data, but qualitative data, right? So how are we engaging our families and our students in conversations similar to this to uncover perhaps barriers that they're experiencing that we might not know about? So thinking through some of those things too.
I just want to just thank Jennifer for coming up with that question. I think it was just a brilliant question. That idea of what are we not measuring, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. I think it's really helpful.
Mr. Seacrest?
I would go back to success again. I think one measure is, do the children really enjoy coming to school? I've asked some of my neighbor kids, little guys, they love going to school. That in itself says something. If they're really happy and they want to go, it's not, oh no, I got to go to school today, Mom. It's, I can't wait to go. I got to go right now, Mom. Wait till Mom's ready. No, let's go. I really have seen that in the kids around my neighborhood. They really love coming to school.
Well,
And that says what we're doing.
And I think that's a really good point that got highlighted with the pandemic, because kids were doing school, right? They were doing the academic part of it, but kids were kids who probably hated school were so excited to go back to school when they were able to go. And, and I think, like, looking at this moment, what is it that they wanted to go back to, right? It wasn't just about, necessarily what was going on. And they had some very engaging teachers at home. You think for a kid, like, I get to be at home, I can be in my pajamas, I can, all this stuff. But there is that value to that environment, to the interaction. And I think, to your point, I think that's, celebrating that is really great.
Okay, I'm gonna skip around. I'm not gonna do the second question because I feel like we've been, it's the overall theme of what we've been talking about. Definitely interject if you feel otherwise. But what systems are in place to identify equity or non-equity practices in our district right now?
I think I would just have the question, maybe that's the question of how to, so maybe when principals do their observations, when principals are being observed, when in other times when people could go to schools and walk through classrooms, was that, I think the book talks about, like, was that a focus? Was it like, look at these categories and, we can kind of figure out how is that defined, but, I think that's, probably the first beginning of the system. And then I think it's the other part of it is for parents to understand, who may not have experience with our school system, with, talking to teachers, when knowing what to look for on their student's report card, or I just did my parent-teacher conference, so this is fresh for me, but knowing the questions to ask the teacher to help their students. And I think, so there's kind of two sides to it. So that partnership with parents as well.
I think starting and defining, which we already are, on what success is, because then we're able, because you said we have a lot of data, right? But is it the data that we need to answer those questions of what is a student that graduates? What's that student? How do we know that they've been successful or are successful? So once we define that, then we can then match up the data and then also find what data we don't have, right?
I'm not going to really answer that question, but just kind of talk around it. Well, the book gave us some different, ways to approach this question. But the way that I'm really been focusing in on equity in my own thinking has been the student's experience in the classroom. Because I've been watching our administrators for many years, and I feel like a lot of the systems, bigger systems, district-wide systems that have been put into place have really been equity-minded for a long time before we were even really talking about that word. And so, but if we really think about how it plays out in the classroom, then we have, I think, wide variety of beliefs and presuppositions about students and ideas about what success is. even understanding of what the word equity might mean, or even or goals, right? I think we just have such a variety of ideas out there that probably different students are really experiencing different things. So, yeah, so I appreciate what you said about when principals are going and doing observations, because that's kind of in line with what I'm thinking, really at the student experience, day-to-day experience level, right? How are we delivering on the equity piece? I'll leave it at that for now.
And I think there are tools that we've, oh, sorry.
I'm so sorry.
it's
We're going to
okay.
do Ms. Redas and then Ms.
Yeah.
Cobian.
And I just want to add a little bit to what Ms. Mendez mentioned. And this takes me back to the tool that we were using, the book that we were reading, and how it mentions to learn how to peel back those layers of the data, right? It mentions that we want to do that because we want to make sure that we want to provide those life-changing options for our students. And because of this reason, this definitely is important because it can provide those recommendations to sustain those equitable practices. So just was to piggyback on what Ms. Mendez had just mentioned.
I was going to say like things that I think we have seen even within the board. So, our kind of the flag that we got about over referring certain groups of students into special education, or, those kind of things where we are using tools, I think, and are looking for those things. And so I think it's just a question of more, in different venues that may not be covered by existing kind of testing mechanisms. The other thing I had a question on is, is there a mechanism to track our students through high school? Like, do we get is there a way to, I know we're separate districts and it's very difficult, but that, they leave us in 8th grade. Is there a way to sort of say, okay, our students from Potrero, this is where they went. This is what happened after they left us. Because I think when we were talking about success, for us, it kind of, our control stops at 8th grade mostly, for the most part. And so, but that's not necessarily how we're defining what we're doing as being successful. Like, we're not saying, oh yeah, we want to make great 8th graders or 9th graders, right? That's we're kind of looking beyond that. And then the other part I was thinking of and looking at equity and things like that is those cohorts of students. So you see so with my kids, they'll start in 1st grade, and I see that class of kids, and you see them all grow up together. And I'll say, just anecdotally, but for the most part, the kids, the way they were in the 1st grade is mostly the way they are in the 8th grade, academically, behaviorally. There isn't, unless there's some really strong interventions, you can just kind of pick them out. And I know teachers have a lot of experience in that. They know, with kids coming in, they can kind of see, but the kids get to start over every year with a new teacher. So, they may have to kind of reestablish that. So anyway, I'm not sure there's any solution or anything, but it's just sort of kind of looking at that, the equity among cohorts of kids as they go up, kind of identifying it within the group.
Mrs. Cobiana, I'm sorry.
Yo, he's next on the
Okay,
speakers list. You were.
I bring this up periodically because I do hear from the community. There are people that are saying we're not fair, we're not equitable concerning recognition of different ethnic groups. They've counted 4 that we recognize. We do not recognize the Irish Americans, the Jewish Americans, Italian Americans, Armenian Americans. We don't mention the Holocaust. One of the prominent ladies in our community, I will not say her name, but she was an elected official, happens to be Jewish. She said, David, the El Monte City Schools, you'll never even talk about us Jewish people. We're not important. And I say, yes, you are. Everybody is. That's one indicator of sources for equity or non-equity, is what the public is saying about us. If we communicate out there, we only consider 4 ethnicities in the United States. That's a disservice to the community. It's a disservice to ourselves because we know better. We're educators. Let's educate. For example, I noticed that we're going to be celebrating, recognizing the Lunar New Year. What about St. Patrick's Day? That's Irish. Do our kids ever know, or the public, about the troubles in Ireland, about Northern Ireland being stolen away from Ireland, about the famine? Millions of Irishmen died because the British did not feed them. People need to know about other ethnicities because we live in a multicultural, multinational, multi-whatever ethnic community. So that is one thing that I think that we're missing as far as equity. Let's recognize everybody. Italian American Month. It comes, we don't even say anything. Irish American Month comes, we say nothing. Jewish American Month, and there you can find when they are. And let our communities know about that. It's not just the 4 that we recognize. So and I'll keep persisting with that because I keep hearing from people out there. My own church has 2 people that are Italian immigrants. They're not first generation. They are from Italy. And they say, David, what about Italian Americans? Columbus did something. He brought Western culture here to Americas. Without Columbus, where would we be? Back in Europe? That's what they're saying. So I'm reporting what I'm hearing. It's not just my opinion, it's what they're saying out there. The public, that's where we hear about equity or failure to be equitable. Thank you.
I will say, I know this is a larger conversation, but we did have the opportunity to highlight some really wonderful work that took place at Gidley last week in remembrance of the Holocaust. So it was just an extraordinary project that an 8th grade teacher led, involved the entire school, and we were able to share that with the school community in remembrance of the Holocaust. So there's a lot of things that are sprinkled across our district, right, that do, highlight the plight of all individuals, I think, from different backgrounds. And I think our teachers do a wonderful job of integrating many things, right, that perhaps we're not always going to be, I don't want to say aware of, but they're not always going to be highlighted on social media. But I can assure you that our students are getting a well-rounded education that by the end, the end goal is to foster the love for diversity, so that there's respect for all people, all ethnicities, and that the differences that we have amongst cultures are really celebrated at the end of the day. So that's the approach, and that's what I see time and time again as I visit classrooms. Then
maybe we should include resolutions recognizing their ethnicities, because we don't do that. I've looked at them. We don't do that.
Well, I think that the agreement a few years back was to acknowledge the diversity in our community and to speak of the diversity. And I think it's a way of highlighting not just the ethnicities that you brought up, but I think all of the different cultures and ethnicities.
But we're not doing that. That's my point. We say we respect diversity, but in our resolutions, it doesn't show that. And the people out there, they're aware. They do follow what we're doing and what we're saying. So I say, if we believe in diversity, then let's include the other ethnicities in formal resolutions every board meeting. I think we should be looking into that. I feel strongly, because I keep hearing about it out there. And I represent out there like we all do. Thank you.
Ms. Fredas, I know you also had a comment.
Yes, thank you. And I wanted to go back a little bit on what our conversation has been, really our main focus for today. And going back to a little bit about what Ms. Mendez and Ms. Cobian said, but recently what you just mentioned about, we were talking about what success really is for us. And, we're talking about making sure that our students graduate and are well prepared, after high school, right? And I just wanted to share something that happened, and I wanted to highlight this in one particular school. It was a promotion day. I was very happy to see this, had never seen this. This particular school brought the students that were graduating, right? And they were sharing where they had gotten accepted. That was a huge highlight, and that, I think, that makes us all very, very proud of the great work that is happening in not just in this particular school, but in all schools. So it's just a great example of really what's going on, right? And how well focused and in accomplishing our goals our our district did. So that was, I just wanted to share that. I think it happened about 2 years ago, but it's still definitely in my mind.
I have an example to share, and it really doesn't relate, I don't think, to a K-8 experience, but maybe we can extrapolate a little bit. I was talking with a student who had come through our district and is now in college, and she was sharing about her experience in her classes in college, and she said, my classes are graded on a curve. And the students who can pay for these professional tutors, who've tutored probably for that course for years, do really, really well on the test. And then those of us who are left to the school's tutoring resources don't do as well. And I mean, that's just a picture right there of inequity, right? It's the way the system is set up, right? There's absolutely something that the instructor can do about it to create a classroom environment that's just more equitable. And why would that, just disturb me so much? Well, the grade that a person gets in their college course impacts whether they get into graduate school or what graduate school they get into. It absolutely determines their future. And so, like I said, that doesn't really, I don't think, correlate exactly to the K-8 experience. I think there are a lot of things that we have in place that kind of protect against that. But I was thinking about that question, what systems are in place to identify non-equity practices. In that setting, how would anybody identify that practice, right? That would be up to, I told her, you need to write about this in the evals. And go hard on this. She says, oh, I never really thought about that, because they ask about, was the teacher relatable, or did they explain clearly? Yeah, but this is really important. So it's up to a student to share this, or up to the teacher to be self-evaluative, right? And as a teacher, I know that as you start to think more and more about these things, you really do because people do care. I do believe that our teachers really do care about these ideas. So as we start to evaluate the way we're conducting our own classes, then we can start making those changes. But as far as the system goes, there's outsiders coming in and looking at a classroom, but really, I think that maybe there are some questions that can be provided to teachers, right, that help teachers to analyze practices in their own classrooms, grade levels, schools.
Ms. Mendez?
Yeah, when you were talking, Ms. Rivas, it prompted me, I'm like, I know I highlighted it somewhere. And it's talking about defining your acceptable floor, and maybe kind of going into question 4, but it says, are there any practices that we simply cannot live with, and that must be addressed immediately as a district office? Again, going back to defining success, but then also defining what does inequitable practices are, identifying that, so then that way when we say, say as a district does equity walks with the principals during classroom observations, it's already defined, okay, but these are successes that we define as success in a classroom, but then also practices that we cannot live by.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think it resonated with me as well in looking at the grading for equity book as well. And I think, in terms of those practices, because in the end, how is a student's progress measured as they go from grade to grade? And it's usually those transcripts and report cards. And the part that always really sticks with me is how much is weighted on where a student starts in the classroom. Are those grades counted as equally, on the first test compared with the one, 6 months later? And it makes me think, the system that we use for the dashboard, the valuation of growth, and then the ultimate, the floor, the ceiling of where we want them to be. And I think, making sure people always have that in mind, that you really need to measure both, because we don't want to say like a student, increased 20%, that's great, but maybe they're only still, 2 grades below grade level. So we need to always have that in mind, but we also don't want to undervalue the work that somebody's doing. So anyway, all that just to kind of say, I think in looking at equity, those measurement tools that we use, because we're not going to get away from grades, we're not going to get away from tests. But I think making sure, like you were saying, that there's kind of this framework for teachers to help them, kind of put that in context or something like that.
I want to thank you for making those comments because I think that relates directly to the first question, right, which is how we're defining success. And I think when we originally discussed that question, it was about how you all are receiving information to evaluate the success of the district, but moving, expanding that definition to talk through how are students evaluating their own successes, and how are parents also evaluating their own successes as a supportive party in their students' educational journey. So,
sorry, one more
Yeah.
thought. I wonder, I know we get like iReady reports, right? We get to see how the students, is there a measurement? I mean, I was thinking like, the UCs and the CSUs are going to do away with the SAT test, right? They're going to go on based on grades. Do we do that same kind of breakdown for the grades that the students get? How many students are getting 3s? How many are getting 2s? From their teacher's evaluation of how they're doing, which is always a little bit different than what iReady may print out for them. So that might be a different way to look at how they're doing. Still quantifiable, but...
We have the ability to pull data, and I'm looking at you, Jose, through Aspen, where we look at grades, right? How many students are receiving 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s? What do those 21st century skills look like? So it is another way for us to look at our data. And to Christina's point earlier, we have a lot of data. I'm confident that we could recreate a dashboard tonight, right, with the data that we have without having to go get more data. It's really about having that focus, right, and creating precision in our thinking, and making sure that what it is that we're intending to do, that we're measuring it on a regular basis. This is very helpful.
And then I guess maybe piggybacking on that, in the same way we can break down maybe iReady or whatever else we're measuring by socioeconomic level, by race, by gender, and that may be a tool to identify equity in terms of, things within the classroom that may need work.
Ms. Mendez?
No, Ms. Kobe, I think that's a great idea, right? It's always pairing one data point with another method point to see how it's comparing. Another one and I know we're going to get there because we have so much data, is the BASC. And that's going to give us another great form of data on the social emotional. I know we have the healthy
California Healthy Kids Survey.
We have that one, but the BASC is going to be given to all students, and we're going to be really able to pinpoint deeper into the social emotional with internalizing, externalizing symptoms. And then from there, like Ms. Rivas was saying, is, not making assumptions, but then, following up with, there's quantitative data, then that qualitative, and qualitative follow-up, and maybe doing a student group sample interviews, for some students. What are some things that you find supportive in school, or some things that you feel like, you still need at school. So following up with data with, then again, what's it, qualitative, what is it? I always forget which one. We have.
Just to piggyback on that, and I do remember, Ms. Davila, you did mention that, you have enough data with qualitative, right?
Quantitative?
Right?
Quantitative. We have a lot of numbers.
Questions.
Yeah.
I think, I don't want to undervalue the nature of our jobs. We also collect a lot of qualitative data, right? I mean, this is a people job. And so the interaction between our families and our schools and teachers also is part of that narrative. There's better ways for us to collect that qualitative data, but I think that's one of the highlights in our district is that, our staff is always listening, right? And they're always trying to connect. You know, they're always, it's, sometimes it turns into like resources. We want to connect people with those resources. But I think, you know, and I'm just thinking out loud, maybe there's a better way for us to really, you know, try to capture some of those experiences and really help tell this story, right? On what we're intending to do and how we're doing it.
Okay. Any other comments? I'm going to keep pushing on how we define success, because I think that's the part of the conversation where, one, I saw a lot of excitement, but also I think there's an opportunity to kind of really hone in on, you know, I'm hearing a trend that we want to, if we're able to define what success looks like with El Monte City School District in this group, then we can start pulling data from different sources to kind of talk through how we want to monitor, right? Ms. Redas, to your comment, right? Monitoring and reporting. And so pulled up on the side screens are some notes from what you all have discussed, and you know, let's try to drill in a little bit more. Like, you know, when you think about success, we talked about students, we talked about staff. It's still very high level. You know, let's think about, I always go back to knowledge, attitude, and skills, right? Like, what do we want our students to walk away with after 8th grade, so that we know that they're going to be successful high school students and adults beyond that.
And I just want to answer, I think, you know, I've seen a lot of growth in our ability to meet with the high school district and create those vertical articulation plans. And we definitely had a system through some very strategic meetings. The pandemic's definitely put a pause on some of that work, and I think it's something that we're all very eager to pick up, because there is a willingness from the high school district to say, hey, you know, we really want to make sure that you know what we require, right, for kids to be successful on our end here, because they are two different systems. And at the same time, we also want to hand off students and say, look, this is how, you know, this is what our students are doing. For a while, we were receiving reports, I think, you know, the DNF rate for students at the high school in that first year. And then we were having conversations around the difference between, you know, motivation and engagement. And so, I think there's more work to be done, and definitely there's a willingness on both systems, and really 5 systems, because it's all of the feeder schools collaborating on what that looks like. But I want to highlight something that I think you said earlier, Mrs. Cobian. You talked about, you know, preparing kids for a world that is constantly changing, and I think that stands true for, you know, 8th grade. Right, is really, you know, the idea that they all go off to different high schools, right, and maybe other systems, but the idea that we're preparing them for those systems, and not just a specific school, not systems, but that we're preparing them for that flexibility, adaptability, and ultimately, I think I heard you say critical thinking, right, so that they can help navigate. To me, that's extremely important.
Oh, yeah.
Adding, you know, from I looked up the 21st century skills to think, is this really what I was going after? And communication is a really big piece there, right? And I think our speech competition was one way I think of emphasizing that and indicating that we're really valuing that piece. But communication isn't just about giving speeches, right? But undoubtedly that will continue to be important.
I opened up our handbook to just review our vision, our mission, our values, and our goals, and I'm seeing things that we're talking about sprinkled in here. But when I was looking at our goals, you know, we have, first one, we will improve student achievement. But now, after this conversation, looking at that first goal, expanding on that, right? What does student achievement mean as a goal? And then again, measuring that goal. because you read it as a now, student achievement very much aligns with the dashboard, right? And then the rest of the goals are very much necessarily focused on different areas, like we will support staff, we'll support, maintain supports for art STEM, we'll nurture partnership, we will celebrate and promote student success, but through quality programs. There's one about fiscal integrity, but really expanding on that first one.
I think we attempted to do that in the core values, if you look at number 2.
Yes, yeah.
Student growth, academic performance, positive personal development are the highest measures of student and district success.
Yes.
And it's such it's so tricky. We don't want to define students by their test score. And yet, if you look up El Monte City School District on any portal, that is exactly, how we are defined. And not to say that, that we have to in turn do the same, but it's one way for us to kind of make sure that, we have to monitor our academic growth. I mean, that's a given. How we expand on that and how we, again, I'm just kind of thinking create our own dashboard that tells the story behind our academic growth. Because, we do have a lot of growth that takes place, right? I'm thinking about, and I'm going to date myself, Los Angeles Times published this article on the value added in education during the CST era. And it was the most controversial article because, the highest achieving schools had very little growth. And then you looked at some of the lowest achieving schools had tremendous growth, but they just weren't able to keep up with the No Child Left Behind Act. And so I think, there's ways to look at data and to monitor, celebrate, the growth, and yet, keep that finish line nice and strong because we know that it's still very important for our kids to be able to access the things that we value in this country and as a society, right?
Thank you. I like that. I'm sorry. You've mentioned the finish line before, and I really appreciate that word picture there. It's really helpful.
And I was going to say, kind of thinking back to the discussion earlier, I think we all, in one way or another, we're talking about opportunities for students, and maybe, thinking about more specifically what that means. Like for me, I kind of define that as, beyond the core academics, but electives, community experiences, things within the school, so opportunities to use 3D printers or microscopes, or for me, it's a very hands-on, tactile thing. So, kids having a chance to interact, have different tools than they might otherwise get. And I know I don't want us to default to an online version of something as being equal to the real life version of it. So just throwing that out there, because it is easy. It's easy to say like, oh, let's go visit this museum virtually. And you can, but it's very much not the same thing. And so I think, again, COVID, is its thing. But, that for me, I think opportunities at the grade level that we're talking about, I think those are really critical to students learning about themselves, going to see a theatrical production. Or I know a couple of years ago, one of my kids went to, go see something at the Disney Concert Hall, and they just talked about it for a week. It was just, was such a great experience. So I think things beyond that traditional classroom environment, or the things we can bring into that environment that enrich what's going on. So just for me, that's how I kind of define opportunity.
You've always mentioned, been advocated music and the arts. Collaboration is another really big one. I just think about people that I know who are so talented. They're so talented, and yet they really didn't do great in school, but they're so talented as far as, leadership ability or just ability to read a room and work with people. I mean, that's great for life. But if our school system makes them feel like they're inferior or just not good enough, then sometimes they don't go out and do all they maybe really actually could do using those gifts. So, so that's another piece for me.
to piggyback on collaboration. And to me, it's definitely students, families, community, and specifically for the purpose to provide an inclusive community, right? An inclusive community where the main purpose for all voices to be heard.
Does anyone have anything to add in terms of the opportunities piece?
I think maybe we had mentioned leadership, opportunities,
Mhm.
right? Just, I mean, the things that schools typically do offer.
Something interesting I was thinking of too, I wonder if there's a way to survey, maybe a part of the Healthy Kids survey, but how far do kids travel outside of here? Like, I mean, I know I've talked to people who are adults now that grew up in this community and they never went anywhere, like, because their family couldn't afford it, or maybe they took one trip somewhere once. And we know that those are not the experiences families with more means may have, and can we, bridge that gap for students, the ones, take them somewhere else, to kind of break that barrier of the world that they know, to give them different experiences. So I'll throw that in there too.
I love that. When you asked about opportunities, I'm not sure to put this into words, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to say it. It has to do with, it's actually things that my own kids have said to me. How come we never get to learn about this, right? So, again, I don't really know how to, I haven't given it very much thought, but really the opportunity to learn and explore things that are really of interest to kids that really do fall under our traditional categories, history, science, whatever. But perhaps in ways that aren't typical to a textbook.
Yeah.
So exploring different ways that we can learn, right?
Yeah, and different kinds of things that are out there.
Anyone else? This is what we call the grown zone. We're talking about collective discussions. It's really easy to spew out solutions and details at the beginning, and then we hit this point, right, where we have to be comfortable sitting in the silence before we can start zeroing in on what the goals and objectives are going to be for.
Well, I mean, I keep looking at this and I keep, when you define success, it's so broad, right? And we're trying to think through an equity lens, but success is broad, like as I mentioned, lenses. But I almost think that this is a question that we may come back to at the end, like question number 5, then after we've gone through what we want equity to look like, what systems do we have in place, and so on, then we're back to, then now how do we define success? And then it might narrow down at least first steps, second steps, third steps for us as a district moving forward.
Yeah, that's a good point. Are we talking about success as, like, we did a good job with that student, like on the student level? Or are we talking about
System-wide success.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been thinking really student-focused, but I think exploring on a broader, broader spectrum could be helpful.
Well, and putting my parent hat on, right? That's what's most important. So it is, I think, we have to focus on the big picture, and we have to make sure that we, don't lose sight of the individual impact of, our work on every student in this district. And we tend to look at data in averages, which is, or we look at trends. But I think there's we have to really challenge ourselves to make sure that we're looking at all of this data and measuring our success with individual students in mind.
So I'm going to throw that question back out at you, right? You just asked it, right? Which is like, how do we define a system success in our district?
I think that as we narrow it down, it's very difficult because everything said really just aligns, right, to what success or is or how we want it to be, right? And that's why coming together, this effort is so great because everyone's perspective and definition is just very important and definitely.
I'm like Ms. Rivas right now. Oh, you go, Mr.
I think one thing that I would like to add about success, if our children are willing and able to ask questions without fear, I think that's part of a success, that they know that there's no dumb question and that they're what they want to say and do is acceptable. And I think I've seen this happen among some cultures where the kids, some cultures, they're not allowed or not encouraged to say anything except memorize something. But as far as, I think part of our success can be if we can find from the teachers themselves, are those children willing, like my grandson, I keep telling him, here's a question I want you to ask today, Aaron. Ask your teacher, why is the sky blue? He says, but I'm a kindergarten student. I go, fine, ask her why this and see what happens. Another one, Brandon, my neighbor, I asked him to ask his teacher. He's studying Egypt. I said, can you ask what the Rosetta Stone was? See if your teacher knows. He says, but if the teacher doesn't know, I'll make him look dumb. I said, no, he won't. He'll go out and look and find the answer. I think that's part of the success, that those kids are willing to break out of that shell, because they come very intimidated. All kids do. They don't want to have their peers look at them and say, that was a dumb question. No, the fact that that's part of the success is encouraging that exploration, willingness to investigate and ask questions. Because one of the memories I have of the superintendent at Monrovia Unified School District, I keep telling her, you're missing out a big thing. She said, what is it? Your school produced a Nobel Peace Prize winner in economics. Put a big banner up there. She says, we're working on it. I said, yeah, it's been 10 years since I told you this, ladies. Work on it more. So I think part of the success is that willingness to be open enough to risk, because it's always a risk when you ask a question. And so anyway, I'll let you know what little Aaron says back when his teacher tells him, why is the sky blue? Thank you.
I do appreciate what you're saying, because I think you're speaking to the culture that we would like to see in our schools. Mm-hmm. The idea that all kids, love to participate, they want to be there. Mm-hmm. That there's a lot that goes into, setting up that culture, right? For kids to feel safe, welcomed, and not visitors or guests, but just, integral to the
I find
schools.
it joyful when I go to pick up Aaron on Thursdays. Every one of those kindergarten teachers says to the children as they're leaving, we'll see you tomorrow. And they'll go, yes. And they're just this enthusiasm, ready for the next day.
Ms. Redas, I know you had a comment.
Yes, just to add a little bit on what Mr. Segrist said, to me it's more like empowering students, our families, our staff to build those strong relationships that are needed, and to nurture that capability that we can collectively remove those barriers to achieve equity and to prevent anyone, right, to make sure that we empower that we will prevent anyone from, that we will be here to help them on the way to achieve their goals and their aspirations, students' aspirations.
Ms. Cobian?
Thinking back to something, what Mrs. Rivas was saying about what we celebrate at school. So maybe that's a place to start, because I think back to, before COVID, there would be assemblies and students would get recognized for maybe like 4 different things. One being reading for their AR goals, attendance, like those were the big ones. And then there were kind of individual awards, or maybe like the theme of the month or associated with Leader in Me. Mm-hmm. And there was, usually a different category. And, I'm wondering if there's a way to, kind of highlight that, that every student has some gift. Are we identifying it? Are we celebrating it? Is there, writing on the card, what are the students' strengths? Even if it's not something where they're, every kid's getting an award for something. I mean, there's value to that and not, so I see both sides. But just within the system, knowing that teachers are looking for that we have some system in place for that to be identified, for a student to know they've been identified in that way. Because that can make a difference too. Oh, my teacher, says, I am a great artist. And kids just that's their identity. They absorb it if that's what it is. So, maybe that's a more practical system kind of change or adaptation.
Yeah, I love what you just said. I was thinking about the recognitions earlier today as well, because, we probably revert to the old student of the month ideas, right? Where just, this was the best student this month, or that one already got it. so I'm going to recognize this student because they're pretty good too. But and then we use the character traits. But I imagine that in some cases, right, we're still kind of just doing student of the month, which then again is affirming, whatever our ideas of a good student are, right? Yeah. So I like that, that you're getting into that, like what are we celebrating? Who are we recognizing? And how can we create shifts in the way we select students to be recognized?
And
because it means a lot to them.
Yeah, well, and unfortunately, I mean, you have only so many months of the school year, and, year after year, it's often a very similar cohort of kids who get those recognitions. So there's, so ways even, from one grade to the next, making sure that everybody gets something identified and seen in themselves.
May I add one more thing, and I just thought about it because my mind is very chaotic. I touched many bases. One measure of our success is the morale of our staff. If our classified and our certificated, if they really feel they're totally supported by this board, that we will listen to their wants and needs and do our best to serve them, I think that's also a measure of success. And I'm so proud to see that when we give those pins out for how many years our staff has been with us, that in itself is a measure of success, because a lot of districts can't do that because their people do not stay, they go. And they feel so, it's like a family that you belong to when you're an employee in this district. And I've seen that in the joy of these people when they get those pins. It doesn't cost that much, but think about what it means to them here emotionally. And like one thing Lizette always brings up about the social emotional being of a person. And that in itself that's a measure of our success there too. Thank you.
Ms. Mendez?
Yeah, I was thinking about the question about defining success, right, for students, but then also as a system. And I was like, I know it's going to come to me right now. And on chapter 6, it really focuses on language. Language is a window into a belief system. So for me, what would define the Monte City School District and how we know that our system is a success? It's the language that is being used across the district. That would be an indicator to know that every single teacher, every single staff member, and the language that they use is language of equity, right? Is a language of focusing on student strengths, on progress. Because too many times, this chapter specifically spoke to me a lot because it emphasized labels and labels of special education. And there's labels of poverty. There's labels of, that student's from that neighborhood. Well, they're not succeeding because, because that their parents are not involved, right? You hear that constantly, daily within the school site language. So that's how we would know in terms of success, so that we have changed the system. It's language. It's going into the teacher's lounge, attending an SST meeting, an IEP meeting, and listening to the language that's used.
That's good.
Yeah. Drop the mic.
I jotted down giving students, like success or equity would be giving students what they need without waiting around to label or categorize them, right? I know that we're working in broader systems, but as we lay out and define what we say equity is, what we understand equity to be, then maybe we push up against some of the other systems that we work with or within, right? And maybe then it just creates a ripple effect. And then I totally agree. That language thing really spoke to me as well, because we all hear, and we've all heard our own voices say things, right? And others as well. So I had jotted down for equity that it would include educators who are willing to analyze and change the old systems, right? But the language is a big indicator of that.
Yeah.
Reminds me of the shift that we've seen recently. We used to classify or categorize students that were below grade level as at-risk students. And we're now calling them at promise students, but it's a mindset, right? It's a shift in our thinking because there's lots of promise there that, we're being challenged to develop versus categorizing students as you're behind and, you're slated to go to fail. So language does play, I think, a very, very important role. And I think it speaks to some of your opening remarks, Mrs. Rivas, about, identifying the brilliance in every child. And as you're hearing you talk about some of the recognitions, we oftentimes recognize the final product, right? The score, the test results. And there's a lot of room to just identify and recognize, what happened in between, right? Regardless of the outcome. Sorry, it's all coming together.
I know. Be comfortable with the silence. It's
Yeah.
okay.
I think the educator, the personalities, right? Like you want to immediately jump to a to-do list. You want to create action steps, but it is important to really let things just sit and continue to think about them, right? So thank you, Christina.
I want to say I think it was one of the questions we didn't quite get to about identifying inequitable practices and what to do. And maybe that's a part of under the success model as well. And I think we kind of talked about it in terms of parents understanding what equity is and should look like. And that's, maybe down the line after, once we have our equity statement, our equity policy and all of that, I think that, will be an important step is the education around it, because we're having all of these discussions and, someone who hasn't been involved, hasn't, done the readings or whatever, but making it accessible. And even so that students may be able to identify that. I know my daughter is very quick in anything that is not gender neutral or equitable for boys and for girls. She's very quick to point that out. Even saying like, you guys, she gets on me all the time about that. And so I think kids have an awareness of what, for them defining what fair, I think is probably how they would put it. But I think we can engage them with this conversation as well. And so they can understand, and maybe it's that this kid gets to do some extra work in this area because, they get some extra resources because of where they need the extra support and that sort of thing. So that's another part.
I think this is definitely wonderful, great information that for our next conversation on our equity subcommittee, definitely going to highlight all this. This has been very helpful.
Yeah, and I think our goal was, right, as we've been meeting with Ms. Anderson, has provided great information leading up to this. We really needed to define what our next steps were. Because I know at one point, we're really looking at our updating our policy, right? To make it ours, which is still a great idea. But then with this now we can go back to looking at our equity statement, our policy, looking at our mission and our goals. And now we really do have in my opinion, a clear understand, like, our first step is defining, what success looks like in the Monte City School District.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I saw you looking at our handbook here. So I opened mine as well, and I've just been skimming the core values and goals. So there is an interplay, right, between the work that the board has done on the strategic plan and then, really then getting out into the nitty-gritty to define success and equity for our district.
Which will then help us identify what data we need to measure that. And then what systems are in place, see?
To support those
To support
goals,
that.
absolutely.
Yeah. To support those practices.
Mm-hmm. Our work is cut out for us.
Okay, good job, guys. Report back to us next week on this, okay?
I'm wondering if it's helpful for us to think about it in terms of questions, right? Questions for the administration, like, how does this, how are we doing on this, and how does this play out in our district? Kind of, I think that we are working from a set of equity values that are internal in all of us, right? But if we can express them in questions that we might have, we might be able to take another step.
That would be really helpful, and I think, and then in turn, I think we look at those questions and, re-examine our strategic plan, right? Because I think the questions that we want to ask after this conversation are the questions that we'll want to continue measuring and defining. And so, not to say that you can't have a lot of questions or a lot of goals or core values in your strategic plan, but I also think there's value in being very clear about what our intent is, right? So that would be very helpful.
That's our homework.
That's your homework. I think
Are we
all
ready
have
for a
homework.
closing? Okay. So I think there is definitely a natural close. A lot of great ideas. And so does anyone want to reiterate what the homework is so that there's a clear understanding of what everyone walks away with for the next steps?
I could make a closing statement. I just thought about something, that we're here because we care enough to do our very best, and that's why we're here. And I really appreciate the sharing that goes on here. Unfortunately, in universities, this isn't happening anymore. They're not listening to each other. If they don't like an idea, they don't want to hear it. They stop people, but the sharing is wonderful. Thank you, all of you.
Definitely want to thank you
agree
all.
with that.
Yeah, for the discussion. I think everyone did a really good job at articulating what they were thinking or just thinking out loud, which I think speaks to you all's ability to create a safe space with each other and a brave space, right? I remember that opening quote, right? Turning a safe space into a brave space. So I think I'm going to try to articulate what the homework is, which is generating a list of questions on what you would like to know more about or check in on how things are happening in the district. So what do you want to know more about? That's the simple way.
I'm
Any
gonna
questions?
add in relation to success.
To defining success with the
Yeah.
Monte City School
That's
District.
helping me define it a little bit better, right?
Are there any questions or closing comments on equity?
Anyone else? I really want to thank you, Ms. Davila, for being our facilitator today. You really brought forward and that opening, as you mentioned, dialogue for all of us. See, I'm very glad that this is very visible, very obvious. We definitely can engage collaboratively in a conversation, right? Because we are obviously here because we prioritize our students, and we are definitely here because of that reason. So, and I know you're doing a tremendous work and all of your efforts in the district. So we thank you so much for all that you do for our students, for our families. So thank you so much for being here today. And we are left definitely with some good homework assignments. So with this said, if anyone else wants to add anything else
I'll
at this
just say
point?
thank you. Thank you to everyone. It was really nice to have the discussion. And thank you, Christina.
Good job, Christina, thank you.
Thank you.
You know, if I could just add, not that I want to throw more things your way, but, you know, I oftentimes will walk away from conversations like this where there was just so many ideas and just so many thoughts that were shared, and I'll, you know, just continue to think about things and more things come my way. And so I'm going to encourage all of you to just keep track of your thinking, keep track of what comes to you, you know, your thoughts, your ideas. You know, feel free to send it my way. We can definitely bring it back. I think, I feel like there's an opportunity for us to meet once more to continue this conversation and really fine tune, you know, the idea of success for the district. I'm really, really excited about that. But I just want to encourage you to really continue thinking about this as we, you know, walk down this road together. Because I'm really excited about the direction that we're headed in, and I'm excited about the possibilities for our students based on today's conversation. So don't stop thinking, add to your notes, and I think an opportunity for us to meet once again is going to be really helpful.
Perfect. Well, if anyone else doesn't have anything else to add, I think we're ready to adjourn our meeting now at 7:01. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
Yeah.